Ahoy there, mates. Welcome aboard the VHS Pirate Ship. I'm Captain Adam, and welcome to the show and tell that treats you well. It's Captain Adam's Show and Tell. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today. Always a pleasure to talk to you. I always like talking tapes and just chit-chatting about all sorts of stuff, and I really appreciate you joining me today. I'm happy to talk to you, and I hope you're happy out there. I hope everything's going well for you. If it's not, maybe there's some shenanigans going on that's not striking your fancy very well. Maybe you lost a job recently. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but just know that sometimes things are blessings in disguise. That job you just lost, is probably a sign to move on to better things, giving you an opportunity to grow and to maybe strike out on your own, maybe try something new, maybe go after that job you've always wanted. Just know that when one door is closed, another is open. I know that sounds very cliche, but that doesn't mean it's not true. And just definitely keep hope alive, keep the faith, and know that whatever happens is a cog in the wheel of the greater plan and action, and everything is going to be all right. Everything is moving forward, so always look onwards, look upwards, go with God, my friends, and trust in Jesus Christ, and everything is going to be all right. Please stay positive, never give up. Well, it's a very special show here today. I guess they're all sort of special, but today's one I've been sort of really itching to get to. Now, that could be the eczema, or it could be I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite home video distributors with RCA Columbia Home Video. One of my favorites just because of the nostalgic look of the early releases, because they have this very uniform design, as you can see right here. One of my favorites just because they're so nostalgic looking. They just really takes you back and really makes you remember how much you really enjoyed VHS and going to the video store and all of this, that, and the third. And these are just my favorites home video designs, just because the uniform sleeves. Now, CBS Fox Home Video, the early ones, they did something like this as well, where it was all uniform sleeves. So it makes it feel like it's a legitimate video library because they're all uniform and they all look great together on your shelf. So it makes you want to buy more of them, and that is the main reason why I have so many, is because when I would come across these in thrift stores, no matter what the title was, I wanted to get it because I liked how they looked, and I just wanted to collect as many as I could, no matter what the movie was. There's some movies in my RCA home video collection I don't particularly care for, but I wanted because I like the case. Now, if that makes sense or not, that's up to a jury to decide, but I like aesthetics, and I certainly like my video shelves to look pretty neat, and this is a good way to do it with the RCA Home Video Library. And if you watched all the other videos in the Captain Adam Show and Tell series, then you'll know that these were in the background on the shelf there. They proved as a very fitting background to these Show and Tell videos, but obviously today I had to rearrange things and give you a new background because I'm using the background for the foreground for today's video. So you'll notice the tapes in the background are quite different, because the tapes that were in the background are being highlighted today. I should say some of them, because I do have a lot of them. So this is going to be a two-parter. I don't like giving you long form videos, so I do try to keep them as under 30 minutes as possible. So I'm going to split this up into two parts. So welcome to part one of my RCA Home Video Library. This is going to be a lot of fun, a lot of recognizable titles in this one, but of course RCA put out a lot of stuff, and not all of them are very recognizable titles. So there's probably some movies you're not too familiar with. Maybe not in this one. I guess the next part two, I'm going to be getting into some of the more nitty-gritty, sort of unheard of films, or at least not as popular films. But as you can see, I got both Ghostbusters, Real Genius, No Holds Barred, Crawl, Stripes. I mean, it's these are some pretty powerful titles, definitely well-known titles. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I really dig talking about RCA home video, the early RCA home video library. Now, I had done another video a few years ago. It's a treasure hoard showcase featuring my RCA home video collection, or at least the ones I had at that time, because that was a few years ago. That's a pretty fun video. I'll put that link in the description. Definitely, it's more verbose than show and tell videos, so it's definitely the older format of my material. So definitely check that out. That's a little bit of a rundown of the history of RCA home video and just what I had in my collection at that time. So that's a fun video. Definitely be sure to check that out. Well, since we got a lot of ground to cover today on part one of RCA home video, my RCA home video collection, let's how about we get right into it? Let's get right into it. We'll start with a movie that everybody knows, with Ghostbusters. And gosh, you know, what can you really say about this movie that hasn't already been said? I mean, it's just so well known. I mean, I don't know. So I'm just going to talk about the tape. Really, one of my favorite things about the RCA home video library is this. Like, one side of the spine has the RCA font, and then the other side has the actual logo from the movie. So you can choose how you wish to display them on your shelf. So that was a nice feature. I always go with the RCA font because it just looks very uniform and nice, and they just always had nice layouts too, especially on the back of their tapes. Just very well done. And see here, if I can get it out here. This is an 87 distribution, but there's another date there. It was 84. Of course, that one was when the movie released, and there on the sleeve there is another date of 85. So you know, dates on VHS, you always go with, of course, the last date to be sure from when the distribution was, because you know you obviously can't time travel when it comes to home video distribution. So the last date will be the one that is the release date. So that's 87 there. Now the curious part about RCA home video, their sleeves, as you can see with this one, it's just a normal cardboard slip sleeve. But they also did a thing where they had these closed box sleeves, to where, you know, they actually had to like unfold something to open it, and we'll get to them. I have some of them in my collection as well, but not all of them were like that, and it's a little hard to really see when they started doing that, because it seems like you would, I have tapes of the same year, but one would have a open slip sleeve and the other would be a closed box. So I'm not really sure if there was any logic to that, if there was a method behind that madness, because it doesn't really seem like there really was any pattern with what they did, or I mean which tapes they did that, because usually if a distributor used a certain package design, they did it up to a certain year and then just changed it to something else, and that's what it was. But this, it seems like there's years where there's like a normal open slip sleeve and then there's a closed box. So I don't really know how they chose to do that, but it is what it is. Definitely a interesting and early form of VHS packaging, because there were a few distributors that did that with the closed box. Media Home Entertainment was another distributor that had closed box stuff, and a number of them did as well. And I just think that as we're going to see here shortly with some other more of my tapes, I think the consumer aspect was they just didn't want to fool with it, because it seemed like it was just too hard to open. Now I know that sounds kind of silly, but really you sort of just want things to be as easy as possible for the customer to enjoy them, and unfolding a box to get a tape out is just sort of just one step too many, even though it sounds like it's not that big of a deal, but really it adds up. So they just went with the normal open slip sleeve to make it just easier to get the tape out, and that is what it is. But I should also mention here, speaking of Ghostbusters as a movie, it's funny that, you know, you have these well-known movies, and there's still stuff that comes up about them, like behind-the-scenes stuff, or just like trivia knowledge about a film that you thought you knew so well. Like recently, I found out that the the character, which is portrayed by Rick Moranis in both Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, Louis Tully, he was actually supposed to be played by John Candy originally, and it was but the problem was John Candy's vision of the character was way different than what really the story would allow for. Like John Candy's vision of the character was he was going to be this German guy who owned like 2 Schnauzer dogs, and it wasn't going to work out because the storyline already included like of course the dog-like beasts that are in it, and I don't know, it would just be too much. So they couldn't see eye to eye on the story, so Candy had dropped out. But he was still friends with those guys. In fact, if you ever watched the Ray Parker Jr. Ghostbusters video, the music video for the song in that movie, John Candy is featured in it. So that's a little bit of trivia there. And of course, Slimer, or the Green Ghost, however it is named, was a tribute to John Belushi, who was a good friend of Bill Murray's, and they wanted to sort of include John Belushi. And apparently, like the first versions of the storyline, John Belushi was actually going to be in it. But then he had passed away. Ghostbusters as a film was in the process for a number of years before it was actually released. So there were a lot of different versions of this movie that was going to be, but what we got was what we got, and I think we're all fine with that. Ghostbusters, still a lot of interesting trivia coming out about this. I mean, you might have known this stuff, but I didn't. So it is how it goes. So let's move on. You can't have Ghostbusters 1 without Ghostbusters 2. Yes, a fine example of a sequel that actually holds up to the original film in which it follows up, because as we know, sometimes that's not always the case. Usually the first movie is better, but then sometimes the second movie is actually better than the first, and then sometimes they just break even, where they're like, they're both pretty good films. And this is a good example. I'm a fan of Ghostbusters 2. This is X Rental, property of Video Wise. Little tag there. 1989 distribution, so this would be the first VHS distribution of Ghostbusters 2. I know it's a matter of opinion, of course, whether or not this holds up to the first Ghostbusters. Maybe you don't like Ghostbusters 2. That's up to you. I like Ghostbusters 2, but I've heard recently that Bill Murray really wasn't a fan of this film because the script that he had signed on to do wasn't what. Well, let me rephrase that. Bill Murray had said, I've heard this now, I don't know if it's true, that the script that he signed on to do was not the same as what the movie actually turned out to be. So he was a little disappointed in the fact that it wasn't the original script in which he thought it was going to be. So he didn't like the film. I liked it just fine. But there's always one thing that's always bothered me about Ghostbusters 2, and that is, how like when they get arrested for drilling the hole in the streets, and they go to court, and there's the court scene, and they have that really mean judge. Now I can understand them being in trouble for like unauthorized digging and destruction of municipal property and all this, but the fact remains is that the judge even said like the court does not recognize the existence of ghosts. But okay, my question is, why would that be? We just saw in the first movie them saving New York City and probably the world from supernatural powers, in which the entirety of New York City saw happen, and dare I say the world probably saw it happen too, because that is some pretty headline news when there's a giant marshmallow man destroying your city. That is, and like an apocalyptic portal being opened up and all this. That's some pretty newsworthy stuff. So you would think the whole world knew about this occurrence from the first Ghostbusters, and therefore would already be believers in ghosts because of that, because what they experienced and what they saw. So why would they be so hard-nosed against the Ghostbusters in the second movie, as if the Ghostbusters were frauds, even though it's quite clear that they're not frauds and what they do is actually legitimate? That's always sort of bothered me. And when they go see the mayor in the second movie as well, he's just very standoffish and doesn't really believe them. Like, why wouldn't you believe them? If anything weird happens, you would want to trust the Ghostbusters, because what they did in the first movie, that should give them a pass to really do whatever they please, and you really should listen to them. That's always just sort of sat weird with me. It's always stuck in my crawl, as it were. But I know if it wasn't for that, there really wouldn't be much of a story, I guess. I don't know. It's just always bothered me. And, I always wanted there to be an official follow-up, Ghostbusters 3. I know there's been other Ghostbusters movies recently, but I'm talking about like Ghostbusters 3, because there was supposed to be one, but it just fell through. I just wanted there to be a Ghostbusters 3 so I can find out how they got the Statue of Liberty back where it was. I always wanted to know how they did that. How would you do that? A big question, I should say. Not a little question, big question left hanging there. So I would love for there to be a Ghostbusters 3, just for the simple fact that they could explain that to me. But it is a movie and there's suspension of disbelief. I like Ghostbusters 2 just fine. And this Ghostbusters 2, I should say, on VHS, more common of a find than the first Ghostbusters. The first Ghostbusters, of course, which we just saw, that was a salt and ball. I had to look on the internet for that one. Never come across Ghostbusters in the wild, and I've been collecting tapes for about 15 years now, well, at least searching for them in the wild for about 15 years, and I've never come across a copy of Ghostbusters, the first Ghostbusters, but Ghostbusters 2, I've found plenty of those, not just this distribution, but other distributions as well. Ghostbusters 1, at least in my area, rather rare in the wild, so now it's time for audience participation. How about you? How about your area? Do you thrift for VHS? And when you do, how often do you come across Ghostbusters, and for that matter, Ghostbusters 2? So, yes, Ghostbusters 2, happy to have this. It's almost, well, I should say also, I got this one first, before Ghostbusters, so I certainly had to get the first Ghostbusters to complete the set, because I am a bit of a completist, and I just needed to have them. Just so happy to have these in my VHS collection, because they look so nice together on the shelf, which I've been prattling on about the RCA home video collection, as they all look very nice all together. So speaking of all of them, let's move on to the next one. And we're going to stick with Bill Murray films with Stripes, a Bill Murray classic, or at least it's considered that. Now, me personally, this is one of those films where I liked it, but then I watched it again recently, and you know what? I didn't care for it all that much. And me, I don't like to be negative, but I must say, this just didn't strike me as well as it did the first few times I've seen this film, and I don't know really what it was. I don't know what it was. I guess it, I think it's too long. It's a little shy of 2 hours long, and to me, my rule is, well, at least I think that comedies shouldn't be that long. Comedies really shouldn't venture outside of an hour and 25 minutes. I mean, any longer than that, you're really just sort of pushing it, and it just loses its luster after a certain point in time. And I just think comedies just need to be shorter films, and this is not that short of a film. And it suffers from what I call the Full Metal Jacket syndrome, where it appears to be two films in one, and that just, to me, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. I know Full Metal Jacket's a classic film and all this, and I don't mind Full Metal Jacket, but my problem with it is, it's like it's two films in one. You have when they're in boot camp, and you have when they go over, and it's like two films in one. To me, it should focus on one aspect of it. It shouldn't be episodic. It's a film. It needs to focus on one particular part of a film. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I don't know. It just makes the film just too dynamic, too involved, and I don't know. I'm just not that big of a fan of Full Metal Jacket, really, and I'm not that big of a fan of Stripes, because it does sort of the same thing, where it seems like it's two movies in one, where it's its own sequel. To me, Stripes really should just be where they're in basic training, and that's really about it, because that's really what the movie is about. These slackers that join the army, and they go through basic training. That's really all the movie should encompass, but instead they get involved in a mission, and they go overseas, and, well, you know how the rest of it turns out. But really, they should have just focused on them going to basic training. That's really, to me, what the charm of the movie is that, these just roustabouts are going to basic training, and we see the hijinks that's involved there. But it's whatever. Stripes, no matter what I may think of it, is certainly an impactful film, one that everybody remembers, and certainly and influential on our pop culture, and it's just it is what it is. I know I say that a lot, but it's a very descriptive saying. It is what it is, and this is an '87 distribution. I'm not sure if this is the first VHS distribution. It very well could be. If it's not the first, it certainly is the second, because it's a very early distribution. And it should be noted here that back in the day, not every film was automatically released on home video. Sometimes it took them a few years to find a movie that they wanted to put on VHS or home video, because things were just so expensive, so they wanted to make it worth it. So not every movie got an instant release. Or I say instant, but usually it took about a couple months to put a movie on video. But they didn't always do that. A good example is The Mummy, the Universal Pictures classic monster movie, The Mummy, with Boris Karloff. That didn't get a VHS release until 1991, if you can believe that. How strange does that sound? A movie as well known as The Mummy didn't get a VHS release until 1991. So, that's just what they did back then, and there's plenty of examples of that. So, bottom line is, I'm not sure if this is the first distribution of Stripes or not. If it's not, it certainly is the second one, because this is pretty early. Stripes, I liked it at first. I certainly like John Larroquette in this. I'm a big John Larroquette fan. Certainly like John Candy in this. Everybody does a good job in this. It's a well done film. I just think it's too long, and I think it's its own sequel. And I think it really just should have focused on them going to basic training. That's about all I'm really going to say about Stripes. So, what do you say we move on, huh? Yes, let's move on to one of the more interesting pieces in my RCA home video collection, with The Gorgon, the Hammer Films horror classic. The interesting part about Hammer Films, they had a Universal. They had a partnership with Universal Pictures as far as international distribution goes. But when it came to home video rights, basically a lot of different studios got them, and RCA Columbia got The Gorgon. Some of the Hammer films were released via MCA Home Video through Universal, or Warner Brothers Home Video for a few of them, and even MGM for a couple of them too. But as far as I know, I think this is the only, if not one of the only, Hammer Films pictures to be released via RCA Columbia Home Video. So that's pretty interesting. Home video distribution rights are a completely different beast than any other kind of broadcast or distribution rights. It's a little bit of a different thing there. I'm not going to get into the details because it is a little convoluted, but it's like lawyer baseball. The Gorgon, a rather interesting Hammer Films horror flick. It's a monster movie that really doesn't pertain to the classic movie monster archetypes at all, as it doesn't contain Dracula or Frankenstein's monster or the Mummy or a Wolfman or anything like that. No, this pertains to a monster from ancient mythology, with the Gorgon, which of course is what Medusa was, the famous Medusa. So the Gorgon here deals with a Medusa type monster, making it very unique amongst not only horror movies but all movies in general, because really there really isn't many movies that contain a Gorgon / Medusa type character. The only one I can think of is Clash of the Titans, and that's not exactly a horror movie, is it? So really, when it comes to Hammer horror movies, I think this is one of their more unique ones, as it really delves into a monster that nobody else really had before. So, and as far as I know, has yet to as well. So the Gorgon, definitely a picture worth checking out. Very unique amongst the Hammer horror films. I am a fan of Hammer horror. I've always liked their gruesomeness for that time period. They were sort of revolutionary as far as monster movies went, and they're a good time. Definitely check out Hammer Films horror movies. There's plenty to choose from, so check them out. You're not going to be disappointed, but don't really be expecting some fast-paced slash a minute action, because they're not really like that. They're very methodical, and they're very British, I should say. It's very British entertainment, and they do it very, very well. So yes, good times had by all, for sure. The Gorgon, a nice picture starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Of course, it's a Hammer Films movie, so of course it does. And that's interesting too because that's sort of a I don't know, a misconception or a misperception or whatever you want to call it. I know it's sort of a joke. Even though Cushing and Lee had starred in many Hammer films, there certainly are plenty that don't have them in it. So, you know, that is just something fun to say. But the Gorgon, definitely one of my favorite pieces in my collection. Gorgeous tape, great condition, just looks like it was barely played. Got it for a rather decent price. Didn't find this in the wild, of course. I had to. This was a sought and bought, so I definitely wanted to get the Gorgon, and I was thrilled to find out it was released via RCA Columbia Home Video. So it looks like the rest of my RCA Home Video library. Very happy to have this piece in my collection, and let's see what else I got. Well, hold up a second. There is something I should address here, and at the risk of overcomplicating this video, you might have noticed. Let me show it again here. The logo there. Did not say RCA Columbia Home Video. Instead, it said Columbia TriStar Home Video. And, RCA Home Video, or rather Columbia Home Video, does have a rather, I guess you could say the best word is convoluted history. A lot of the home video distributors did have a bit of an odd and long history as far as conglomerates and mergers and subsidiaries and stuff like that. And of course, RCA, or rather Columbia Home Video, is no exception. Columbia. Let me start over. Columbia Home Video started off life in 1978 as Columbia Pictures Home Video, and then in '82 they merged with RCA and became RCA Columbia Home Video, and then I think around '87 TriStar became a thing, and then it joined in the fun, so it was RCA Columbia TriStar Home Video, and then in 1991 RCA dropped out. I'm not sure if they just left, or if they were bought out, or what, but it was no longer RCA Columbia Home Video. Come 91, it was Columbia TriStar Home Video, and that is what this distribution is. And this is where it gets a little confusing because the date on the tape says 87, but it can't be 87 if it's a Columbia TriStar Home Video release, because that wasn't until 1991. So that just brings into question the accuracy of the dates on these tapes when they do say Columbia TriStar Home Video. They're at least 91s. It is a little hard to research this stuff because this stuff really wasn't documented all that well, because I guess why would they? So yeah, if you have any of these and they have a Columbia TriStar Home Video logo on them, it means that they're at least 1991s, despite what the tape says. So that makes it even more difficult to chronicle any of this stuff. So yeah, VHS collecting can get rather complicated, more complicated than it should be, and I really didn't want to make this video more complicated than it should be. So I'm going to leave it at that. All I can say is there isn't much of a difference between RCA Columbia Home Video and Columbia TriStar Home Video. As you can see, the layout designs are the same as far as the uniform sleeve, the red trim, the white lettering, all that. It's all the same. It's just different names. So now let's move on. And oh man, what can I really say about this next one? Here we have No Holds Barred, the Hulk Hogan instant classic. What can I say about this film? I watched it recently, and it's okay. It is what you would expect it to be. Of course, it's not any kind of really engaging cinema, but it's certainly a fun movie. Certainly what they call a popcorn movie, which is what this was really just intended to be. Hulk Hogan's first major role outside of Rocky III, with his little bit part in that film. This was. And I've heard this was supposed to be the WWF's, or I know it's WWE now, but the WWF at the time was going to be their first foray into making cinema, making movies. So this was supposed to really kick off like a WWF studio type thing, but I don't think that ever really came to fruition. But this certainly is a memorable attempt to do such a thing. Just a classic film. It introduced all of us to Tiny Lester, which of course would go on just to be well known with movies like Friday, and of course he was just surprisingly in The Dark Knight. He just kind of shows up, and of course he was in Fifth Element. He's done a bunch of films, and it's a good time. He was in Wishmaster 2, the sequel. He just kind of would always just pop up in films. Of course, he had passed away Sort of recently. I know it was a few years ago, so may he rest in peace, of course. So yes, here we have it's a 1989 RCA Home Video distribution. So this is the first distribution of this film, as it does have the RCA Home Video logo. It doesn't say Columbia TriStar Home Video. So this is the real deal Holyfield, or I guess real deal Hulk Hogan. Really. But yeah, happy to have this one. This is one of those tapes where you just have to have it in your collection. Basically, it's going to be, it's really the only Hulk Hogan movie I have. Well, no, I have Suburban Commando, and I'm really okay with just those two. And I do have Three Ninjas, what was it, Battle at Mega Mountain or something like that, where Hulk Hogan's in that with Jim Varney. So that's an interesting piece, a cinematic piece there. So, but yeah, I'm okay with not having Mr. Nanny or Santa with Muscles. I'm okay with that. Maybe one day if I come across it in a thrift store, I'll certainly pick those films up, but I'm not seeking them out. I really am okay with not having them as it is right now. So hey, let's keep this little train going here. Let's see what we got next. Well, hold up again here. I always say that, then I think of something else to say. Yeah, and I should say that I misspoke earlier. It's not Tiny Lester, it's Tiny Lister. His full name is Thomas Lister Jr., and of course in No Holds Barred he portrayed Zeus, the human wrecking machine. And WWF did a very interesting thing with this to really promote this movie. They did this cross-promotion thing where Zeus actually ended up in the WWF and was a wrestler and had a little program with Hulk Hogan, which I always thought that was interesting. Now, as a kid, I thought it was great, but, looking back as an adult, it was a little strange because in No Holds Barred, Hulk Hogan doesn't portray Hulk Hogan. He portrays Rip, and but Zeus portrays Zeus. And so when he crosses over into reality, Zeus is still Zeus, but Hulk Hogan isn't Rip. He's Hulk Hogan. So we're not supposed to believe that Hulk Hogan is real, but Zeus is. I don't know. It's some weird multiverse stuff before that was really a thing. So that is very interesting, and kudos for WWF for doing such a clever cross-promotion thing there. It was a big deal too. '89, my favorite year for professional wrestling, and this is one of the reasons WWF really was hot in '89, and you could say it was because of this film and this cross-promotion thing they did where the match meets the movie kind of thing. And they did this once No Holds Barred got out of theaters. They put it on pay-per-view, and then it was I think December 26th of '89. They did. You could buy the movie on pay-per-view, then watch this exclusive cage match between Hulk Hogan. It was a tag match. Hulk Hogan and Brutus the Barber Beefcake against Macho King Randy Savage and Zeus. And you could watch that exclusively on pay-per-view. Of course, you could watch that match on the WWF Super Tape Volume 1. But that match, say what you will about it, the Zeus, or the Tiny Lister, as impactful as he certainly wasn't that skilled of a professional wrestler, but that's okay. He was an actor. He certainly proved his point, and the look was what they were going for, and he did it just terrifically. So yeah, Zeus, what a character, and it was just what a promotional gimmick they had with this film. So yeah, good stuff there. I mean, really, that's what makes this movie really that more memorable, is that little cross promotion thing they did. So very well done. Yes, No Holds Barred, happy to have this, and I also have that super tape I was just talking about. I'm happy to have that as well, but I will show that on my wrestling tape show and tell here coming up soon. So now let's move on. Well, up next is a film I've already discussed in my Betamax show and tell episode with Roxanne. I already talked about this film in that episode, so I'm not really going to discuss it again. As you can see, this looks exactly like the Betamax. I mean, the Betamax is smaller. This is just the exact same thing, only it's VHS and a little bigger. So that's about all I can really say about this. I should say, though, that this is one of the first RCA Home videos that I got for my collection. Found it at a thrift store for a quarter. And where'd it go? Oh, hold on. Oh, here it is. Oh, I wanted to show. This is one of the closed box RCA Home Video VHS, where you really had to work to get it. As you can see, I'm having a hard time here trying to get it out, which is why one of the reasons why they decided just to go with the normal slip sleeve as opposed to a box you had to open. So that's always fun. You live and you learn, right? So yeah, the closed box. I mean, not all the early RCA Home videos did it. So Like I said before, I don't know what their formula was for which one got one and which one didn't. I don't know. But it's there it is. Roxanne, already talked about the film. Not going to talk about it anymore for interest of time. And let's move on. And what a thing to move on to with Crawl, or Kroll, I guess how you pronounce it. Considered a sci-fi epic of the early 80s. This came out in 83. And let me tell you, the world was just simply hungry for films like this. And they got Crawl, which is the antithesis of science fiction fantasy, because it is like a sort of like a sword and sorcery flick, but it's got science fiction-y stuff to it. So this is a ex-Blockbuster copy, as you can see there. Price $4.99. I did not pay $4.99 for this. I think this was 50 cents. Another closed box, RCA Home Video. So this film, I should say, I did watch this recently, and I wasn't very impressed with it. There you see the Blockbuster spine sticker. Please remember to rewind, or I'll kill you. A lot of fading there on the cassette label, but it plays just fine. It's got some wear and tear, but that's all right. It happens. Well, anyway, like I was saying, I just wasn't too impressed with this film. I know a lot of people love it, and I understand why. I'm glad it exists, but I was expecting a little bit more from it. I just didn't care for it too much. Thought it was a little bit too slow. However, the story with that the giant spider and that one guy, that should have been its own little movie. That was pretty interesting, but you didn't really hover around that too much in this film. But yeah, once it gets rolling, it's all right, but it just takes so long to really get the party started on this one. So Crawl, not my favorite film, but I'm glad it exists. And let's move on to my next tape here, which is a film I am tremendously glad it exists, and it's a film that is one of my favorites with Real Genius. Could be considered a rather underrated 80s movie. Not that, well, maybe I should say underappreciated, because people do know about this film. I just don't think it gets talked about nearly enough, because when it comes to like 80s movies, everybody just kind of hovers around the John Hughes stuff, which is fine, I understand. But there's plenty more that really, excuse me, there's plenty more that really don't get the recognition they deserve. And Real Genius, I think, is a prime example of that. And this is just a phenomenal film. Most of us, this is when most of us were introduced to Val Kilmer. I think maybe if you saw Top Secret before this, you knew who Val Kilmer was. But I don't know, this really seemingly put Val Kilmer on the map. And certainly was our first introduction to John Grise. He played Laszlo. Of course, he would go on to be Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite, which is where everybody basically knows him so familiarly from, is Napoleon Dynamite. But of course, he was in many other films as well, including the Monster Squad, as possibly the best Wolfman or man cursed with the werewolf curse, because he just plays it so desperate and so just deranged, because he just doesn't want to be a werewolf. But in fact, in the credits, he is known as just the Desperate Man. So he just did a phenomenal job with that. And of course, he's also in Terror Vision. If you haven't seen Terror Vision, do yourself a favor and watch that movie. That movie is insane. A delightful film, you could say. He plays the heavy metal guy. His nickname is OD. It's just funny. It's a great movie. But yeah, Real Genius, a lot going for it. I do discuss this at length in my Back to School special, and I'll probably put the description for that video, or the link for that video in the description. Definitely check out that video. That was a fun time. But in that, I discussed that the director, Martha Coolidge, I think that's her name, she actually got consultations from actual physicists to see how like the whole laser thing worked, and apparently that's all pretty legit. So that's interesting. And my thing with this film is I think it was just too smart for its own good, and most of the public really didn't understand what they were talking about, because it does involve laser and quantum physics, and not a lot of people are very privy to that science. So, but it works so well. Just a great film. I wish it was talked about more than it is. But it's not. That's just how it goes sometimes. And this particular VHS, I'm quite certain it's the first VHS distribution of this film. It's got the RCA Columbia Home Video logo on it, so you know it's before 91. And it's got the closed box, as you're getting ready to see. The closed box, I don't know how I feel about it. I understand it and all, but it just seemed like it was an extra step. I think I mentioned that already. But it is very, very nostalgic. Certainly different when it came to VHS packaging, and that was the name of the game back then, as you wanted to really stand out amongst your competitors, which is why there were so many different designs for VHS packaging, and this is a good example with the closed box. So yeah, real genius. One of my favorite films. Absolutely happy to have this, and I think this is a rather common thrift store find. At least it was. I knew I came across like 3 different copies of this. Yeah, real genius. What a tape. Glad to have it. I watch it at least once a year because I just think it's such a fun movie. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, I don't know what your problem is. Certainly, you need to correct that immediately. It's a great film, certainly a quintessential 80s movie because it is very, very 80s. And yeah, I think you're going to have a good time watching this. And if you've already seen it, if you already watched it, watch it again. You know, it's always worth another watch. It's really, really good stuff. Well, I tell you what, this video is going on awful long because there is a lot in my RCA Columbia Home Video library. So I'm going to put a bow on part 1 here, and so stay tuned for part 2 coming up eventually. That's going to entail some pretty fun titles and some titles that I don't like so much, but I just get them because I want to try to get everything in the RCA Columbia Home Video Library. I know that sounds insane, but I just like how they look so much. I don't care what films they are. I'm just going to get them, and that's pretty much my rule. Every time I come across one of these in the wild, I do just pick them up because I just like how they look, and I don't care if I like the film or not. And in the next episode, there's going to be a couple that I really don't care for too much, and I sort of questioned why I even bought them. But then I remind myself, hey, it's because they all look so sleek and good, and I just really like them. So please stay tuned for part 2 when we continue with this RCA Columbia Home Video adventure. Yes, thank you very much for watching. I'm very, very glad you joined me today on this show and tell. I hope you had a good time. I had a good time. I always enjoy talking to you about the tapes and all sorts of other stuff, and you know, I just wanted to remind you out there to stay positive, and whatever's going on, you know, you always got to look onward and upward, and things are always going to turn around for you. They always will. There are people in your corner, and of course God is looking out for you. You just got to look to Him and trust in Him, and look to Jesus Christ, and everything is going to be all right. Trust me on that, folks. Really, I certainly mean that. I'm not just saying that. I'm not just blowing smoke. I certainly 100% believe that, and I encourage you to give it a shot. So please stay positive, go with God, my friend. Be brave, be kind, and be generous, and take care out there. And I'll see you next time only on Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship. Goodbye, and God bless.